What's up, everybody? Hey, just trying to get the progressive era over with. Seems like we've been on here a long time, especially given the fact that we had so many snow days. So, didn't want to give you one last piece of progressivism and just tie that into like how this is going to lead us into World War One, because the progressive era, not only did it help our workers here in the United States, but it did give us a kind of an aggressive foreign policy outside the United States. And that being, we got caught up in the race of imperialism. So I'm going to show you this slideshow. It's relatively a short slideshow. I want to say it's about 12 slides. And so that's something a lot shorter than what you guys are used to doing. This is an old slideshow that I had made, and I do have a worksheet with it, but I think I'm just going to put this on Edpuzzle instead. We're not going to do a quiz or a worksheet on this. We're just going to do this Edpuzzle and call it quits for the progressive era. Before we get into the foreign policy, I want to remind you, why do we call it the progressive era? I mean, we have modern day progressives, and yeah, maybe they stem out of this tradition, but they are different than the progressives from 100 years ago. What caused the whole notion of progressivism is we have an economic system that was originally built on the free market system. Now that's good for starting business, but it's not necessarily always good for the worker, the community. A lot of times when you're putting money into the equation, people will get greedy. It's happened. We've seen it go down. People will shirk their responsibilities in terms of keeping the environment clean if it's cheaper to pollute. And so that's just one example, right? We've been studying the 1800s a lot, and, working conditions were pretty bad. You guys saw that when we did industrialization. So what the progressives did was they came along, guys like Theodore Roosevelt said, hey, I'm going to give you the square deal. What's the square deal? Well, it's things like a minimum wage. The thought that if you're going to be working 40 plus hours a week, you should be making enough money to survive, that you're not starving on those wages. And you'll hear sometimes like a modern progressive like Bernie Sanders address something like that, like, hey, we need $15 an hour. Okay, Bernie, that might be true. I love you, Bernie. I'm feeling the burn sometimes. That might be true in California or New York. We probably don't need $15 an hour in Indiana. Maybe like $11 or $12 an hour. I wouldn't say people would shrug their shoulders at that. That could probably help Hoosiers out a lot, but we just don't have as high a cost of living, right? And so those are the progressive arguments. So you got Theodore Roosevelt here. He's really the first progressive president. He ushers in the square deal that did things like set a 40-hour work week, that did really good things like child labor protection laws that we still have to abide by. And some of you experienced that because you guys are at the age where you're driving now. But in theory, you're not supposed to be working more than 20 hours during the school week, right? So, that all falls under child labor laws. It led to the Food and Drug Administration making sure our food was clean because, things like in the jungle, we talked about the jungle a little bit. Rats got into the meat. Rats were getting into the grinders with the sausage. Rat turds and everything getting pushed out into the sausage. So, there was just a lot that happened, and there's so much to cover in that. And I think the slideshows that you guys did particularly focus more on what were women doing during that period, what were African Americans doing, what were Hispanics doing, how were minorities and how were migrants to the country treated. And the truth is, it wasn't fair. The square deal was meant for like, hey, let's get these poor white guys up to middle class, right? So there was a little bit of level of prejudice in there. We see that with social Darwinism, And social Darwinism is going to come across pretty heavily in this slideshow. So this is America's role. Theodore Roosevelt did a lot of great things for the country. I mean, I don't think anybody could say that having some kind of a minimum wage and a 40-hour work week are good. And I think that, when you reflect on like Food and Drug Administration or child labor laws, those were all very positive things that came out of the progressive era. But foreign policy was a different subject. So you can see Theodore in the background here. He's got a big club. He had a pet project that was making America a great naval power. So you can see him pulling a bunch of boats in the background. We'd won the Spanish-American War, and although it's blurry, you can kind of see it at the bottom. It says the big stick, the Caribbean Sea. I don't know what that middle word is. He had a saying which was walk softly, but carry a big stick. In other words, don't, be a bully. Don't stick your chest out there and like challenge others to a fight, but just have your stick there to show by action that you mean business and people won't mess with you. So that in big part is what this slide shows about. We did capture Puerto Rico and Cuba. And so that makes us an imperial power, right? I mean, could you make an argument that the United States is an empire? Well, one of the definitions of an empire is it's bigger than a country, which means that it has people that speak multiple languages. Yeah, that checks us. We're multiple states, which are in some ways kind of their own countries. Each state has a different makeup. And we even control places like Puerto Rico and Guam still. So are we an empire? All right, that all kind of goes back here with Theodore Roosevelt. So here it is, and this is another reason why maybe he's rated in the top 10 presidents of all time, is that he developed our modern military. All right, so this is U.S. and Latin America. So when we're talking about the age of imperialism, the European powers are carving up Africa. They're going after territories in Asia. Japan, the first non-white country, becomes an industrialized power. They get in on the action. And the United States said, hey, we need a piece of that pie too. So all the big, powerful industrial nations of the world start to look at the rest of the world. Okay, so think about this. They've got engines and machine guns and trains and powerful battleships like what you're seeing on this picture. And then let's look at Africa. Still living in the Middle Ages. They don't have steam power. They've got rifles, but maybe they're like single firing shot rifles. A lot of the tribes are still fighting with spears and shields. And in rolls countries like Germany and Britain with the Maxim machine gun, right? They were able to annihilate whole tribes and take over whole swaths of territory. And so they started carving up the world. In the United States, we got in on that business. Now, when it says the U.S. and Latin America, what's interesting about that, I think you might all find this interesting. Here, let me just switch slides. Oh, here he is. There's Teddy, the big stick sitting on his battleship. All right. So when we're talking about South America, a couple of things you guys should think about. The United States has become the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. We have more Spanish speakers in the United States than are in Spain. Okay, the only other country that has more Spanish speakers than us is Mexico. All right, I think there's something like 70 million Spanish speakers in the United States. So that does make us the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. And some of that happens under Roosevelt. So just keep a couple of things in mind. Why are we the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world? Well, we fought the Mexican-American War. We took half of Mexico away. We fought the Spanish-American War. We took Cuba and Puerto Rico. And what is most of our Spanish-speaking population? They are Puerto Rican. They are Mexican Americans. And there's a lot of Cubans. Go down to Florida, go down to Miami, Florida, and it's basically a Cuban town. Okay, so Cuba and Puerto Rico come in with Theodore Roosevelt. All right, now we had adopted this concept. Let me see if I can't get this slide to change. We had adopted this concept that America is our playing ground. You guys want to carve up Asia, you guys want to carve up Africa, that's fine. But we get America. Now, our imperialism was a little bit different. Yeah, we conquered countries, and yeah, we sent armies in countries. But it was more about, for us, installing a friendly American government so that our businesses could invest in money in those countries. So we're going to get into this a little bit more, but particularly, like, this is kind of crazy to think of, but Chiquita Bananas. Think about Chiquita Banana Company. We basically overthrew half a dozen governments in Central America, including Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras at one point in time or another, so that we could install pro-American friendly dictators that would allow Chiquita Banana Company to operate however they wanted. So, I mean, we could talk about progressive ideas, but they didn't necessarily translate to Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy. All right, I'm going to get off my political stump here because we need to move on with these slides. The U.S. dominates Latin America. Americans called for a more aggressive role in Latin America. American leaders viewed the region as the nation's backyard and as a sphere of influence that the Europeans should be excluded. So particularly Theodore Roosevelt used what we call the Monroe Doctrine, and that was designed by President Monroe. And he basically said, hey, if a European power attacks a Latin American country, the U.S. will come to its aid. And so we kind of drew a line in the sand for places like England and Germany early on. Well, Theodore Roosevelt takes that to the next level, right? So the U.S. influence in Latin America brought obvious benefits to the U.S., but it also contributed to anti-American hostility and instability in the region. I mean, I hate to say this, and this is probably something that you guys have not really heard or thought about a lot, but we have not been the best neighbor, really, to a lot of Latin American countries. In fact, a lot of the migration that we have is kind of our own making. It's almost like, have you heard the saying, we made our bed, now you got to lie in it? A lot of the conditions that are in Central America are conditions of us installing dictators that took advantage of their people, right? And so naturally, the people that live in those areas, when they find out these things, tend to have a very negative image of the United States. So you can't go monkeying around in somebody else's country and then expect goodwill. So there he is, Theodore Roosevelt. Hey, he looks like another guy I know. Could be standing right next to Luke Diener. I should impose that picture right next to that. All right, American colonies. So in the beginning of the 20th century, the United States had become accustomed to military involvement overseas. The U.S. had made colonies out of both Puerto Rico and the Philippines. The U.S. had also made states out of Hawaii and Alaska. So we're spread out. You know, everybody thinks about Alaska and Hawaii like, woohoo, those are states in the United States. Well, they were colonies first. And we, bought Alaska from the Russians. We took Hawaii away from the English and the Hawaiians, right? And so we're pushing ourselves out there. So if you think about it, Hawaii is a conquered set of islands that is like in the center of the Pacific. Why the heck is that even a state? So we made that a state to keep really the British from laying their hands on it. And so then that begs the question, well, if Hawaii is a state, then why isn't Puerto Rico a state? All right, this chart shows that President Roosevelt and Wilson, who follow him, resorted to frequent use of U.S. troops in Latin America. So if we look just at the number of times that there's like military incursion. So here's kind of let me kind of run through a scenario of how this would work. All right. So you're a peasant living in Salvador or Honduras or Guatemala. Your job is to plant, grow, and harvest bananas. The Chiquita Banana Company is paying you 5 cents a day to do it. So these are some of the same conditions that we saw in like 1800s in industrial situation in the United States, right? What happens in the United States? We form unions. We, sometimes that resulted in violent action against the Pullman strike or the Haymarket Street riots. And it eventually led to the progressive presidents. Well, what happens when the people of Salvador say, we want a higher salary? What happens when the people of Honduras and Guatemala say, we need to overthrow this government and demand progressive reform? Well, what happened was we then sent our troops in to suppress that revolt and keep those dictators installed in power so that Chiquita Banana Company could pay those low wages. And essentially, what we did was we made Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras our own personal serfs and peasants working, in some ways, kind of some weird ways working on the plantation down there. So each and every time these guys try to revolt, Theodore Roosevelt, here you see it on the timeline. I mean, it's almost like every year there's some kind of violence going on, or we get, kind of interspersed. You got 1901 to 1902, Colombia by Roosevelt. 1903 to 1904, Dominican Republic by Roosevelt. You got 1903 to 1914, Panama, which is we're going to get to Panama here in a minute. Panama was part of Colombia. You got Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson involved in that one. That was long, right? We got a lot of fighting going on during that time period. 1906 to 1909, Cuba again. 1910, Nicaragua. 1915, Haiti. I mean, it's just us supporting free market capitalism, trying to keep workers. I mean, hey, if I'm a business owner, I'm going to try to capitalize the best I can. That's where we get the word capitalism, right? What's one way you can save expenses? Pay your workers low wages. Don't worry about polluting or making safe conditions for them to work in. That's cheap. That's easy, right? Now, if we can do it by force and there's not going to be a backlash for us, then why not send the troops in? So that's kind of the situation that we're facing here. And here's kind of a muckraker picture of that. That'd be Uncle Sam staring at Cuba. He's looking at like low-hanging fruit that he can just pick, right? And I know right now I'm guys, I want to apologize here because I am painting kind of an ugly picture, but it weren't pretty. Let's just put it that way. Now, that does not mean that as time goes on, and I want to be very clear about this because, we got to look at this from multiple perspectives. That does not mean as time goes on that we don't do the right things and we don't lead by example and do good things. World War I and World War II are great examples of that. We helped prevent people like Hitler from imposing fascism on large portions of the world. And we helped rebuild Europe and other places like Japan to become some of the most effective democracies that give freedom to their people. So I don't want you to think, oh, this is just horrible. America is just this dark and seedy place. Yeah, we got a bad chapter, but we also have some good chapters too. So just keep that in mind. Don't like completely hate on America, right? We got to look at both sides of this. All right. The Platt Amendment, what was it? The Platt Amendment effectively brought Cuba within the U.S. sphere. So the Platt Amendment gave the United States the right to preserve order as needed in Cuba. So we had a problem with Cuba. We had basically taken away from the Spanish, but we had made this agreement. Well, we're now make you a colony. We're just coming in to help the poor Cubans. But as time goes on, we're like, why did we do that? We should have just taken Cuba for ourselves. If we had have taken Cuba for ourselves, they would be like another Puerto Rico to us, right? But we'd written out this agreement, and so we made an amendment to that agreement. And the amendment was, at any point in time that we think there's trouble going on in Cuba, we have the right to use military force to protect our citizens, to protect our property, and to protect, American business. So, unfortunately for Cuba, it limited Cuba's ability to make treaties with other forms of foreign policy. It gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuba whenever it wanted. It also gave the United States the right to control areas of Cuba in which it could establish a naval base. We still have that naval base in Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. Got a lot of terrorists in that base. All right, there he is. There's the man. Speak softly and carry a big stick. All right, there he is. And look, he's just like knocking people out. He knocks out the railroad trust, the oil trust. Who else he got knocked out in general? I'm not sure what that means. Everything. He's just knocking it all out. You don't mess with Teddy Roosevelt. All right, the big stick diplomacy. So that's his foreign policy, right? President Theodore Roosevelt's foreign policy. Which diplomatic style most promoted military action? The big stick. So Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy depended on a strong military to achieve America's goals. So, Roosevelt grows up in a military tradition. He's very hawkish. He's very pro-military, fought the Spanish-American War. And he's like, look, in order for us to assert influence in the world, we have to have a powerful enough military, especially a navy, that can compete with the Germans and the British. Otherwise, we will lose our influence. That will affect our business. He wasn't wrong. He was not wrong about that. We are who we are in part because of his big stick policy. Now, there were some unfortunate side results of that. Mainly speaking, supporting places like the banana company. So every time you eat a banana, you need to think about how that went down in the early 1900s. All right. Based on the belief that the U.S. needed to civilize weaker nations, called for businessmen and politicians to lead internationally. All right. So I think what I mean by that, and I'm sorry about the spotty wording there. What I mean by that is, civilize the weaker nations. Think about that term. That term is a social Darwinism term, right? We need the white man who's more civilized, has a more powerful industry to come in and help the poor brown man industrialize this country and in the process help our own businesses out, right? Take their resources and show them how to use it. I don't really know how to put it. Social Darwinism's kind of an ugly thing, really. I mean, there's no pretty to social Darwinism. But again, at the time, how are you going to legitimize what you're doing to poor people in Nicaragua? How are you going to legitimize keeping a dictator installed in that country? Well, the way you do it is through social Darwinism. All right, now, businessmen and politicians, really hype on this. They're like, okay, we got all these progressive reforms in the United States. We don't have to apply those to places like Guatemala, right? All right, now, one of his signature achievements is the Panama Canal. So I don't know how much you know about the Panama Canal, but it's a short little strip of land, the isthmus between North America and South America, and it's so thin that America decides we're going to build a canal through it, and that way we can send our ships through that canal, and it's going to be a lot quicker to get from California to New York. The problem was somebody owned that land, and who owned it? Colombia. So we asked Colombia, hey, why don't you sell us a strip of land that we can dig a canal through? The Colombians said, no. You don't say no to Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt sent our military in, conquers that isthmus, and says, yeah, we're going to make Panama a new country. All right. So then he gets a contract from the newly made country of Panama to dig his canal. Now, it is quite the achievement. It is a little bit uncomfortable to talk about how Panama becomes a country because there was really no such thing as Panama. I don't think the Panamanians wanted to break away. Now, Theodore Roosevelt goes down there and he finds some rich dudes that are like, yeah, we'll run the government for you. And yeah, we'll sell you this little strip of land to make us richer. So yes, we'll be happy to do that for you. But I don't think there was ever really like this Panamanian resistance to Colombia. They thought of themselves as Colombians, right? So how did the United States get access to the canal zone in Panama? The U.S. military-backed rebels. Well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there were rebels down there. The U.S. military-backed rebels who soon controlled independent Panama. President Roosevelt sent troops to support the Panamanian rebels in the fight against Colombia so that the United States could get the rights to build the canal in Panama at low prices. Okay, now, I could be wrong about this. Were the rebels there before, or were they there after we decided to make Panama a country? That's something we'll have to look up. Maybe there was a rebellion. Maybe there was an active rebellion to try and break away, and we just decided to side with it. Anyway, he did find at least enough willing people to form their own country, right? And then he sold himself the Panama Canal at low prices. All right, so there he is, standing in the United States. You can see he wants to take a prominent role here. As you look at him, he's carrying the new diplomacy like a nightstick. Look at how they're portraying the Latin Americans down in the corner and the Arabs. Then to the right, you see the Europeans, and he's kind of standing in between the Europeans and the Latin Americans, and I don't know if is this supposed to represent that he's protecting Latin America and he's helping the Latin Americans, or is this portraying that he's telling the Europeans, hey, they're mine, you stay out? I don't know. You could probably interpret it either way. All right, Roosevelt updates the Monroe Doctrine. This is what I'm talking about, the Monroe Doctrine. So it was called the Roosevelt Corollary. The U.S. would assume the role of police power, restoring order and stopping Europe from intervening. European countries were threatening Latin America over bank loans and unfair trade agreements. This became an excuse to intervene anytime to change governments. So again, we had the Monroe Doctrine already. I don't know how much we could enforce it, but it was basically a statement to the European powers that, hey, if you attack someplace like Venezuela or Mexico, we're going to come in on their side to help them fight, keep you out. We don't want European powers coming in and attacking whether they're North American or South American republics and installing like kings or setting up new colonies. So the general idea was a good thought. Then when it gets to the 1900s and we actually have muscle that we can flex, that's when, you get Roosevelt starting to police and tell like which European countries can't come in. I think and this is again something we might have to look up. At one point in time, Germany had threatened to. Venezuela had taken a large loan from Germany that they couldn't pay back. And Germany was threatening to come down in with their military if, and again, we'll have to look this up, but if Venezuela did not pay them back, and maybe it was more than one country. It might have been Germany and England and France. And basically, what Roosevelt does is he sends his fleet down to Venezuela, says, don't even think about it. We'll go ahead and pay the debt so that you don't have to, you have no more claim. If you do come down here, here's my battleships. So he buys off the Venezuelan debt, and then he tells Venezuela, now you owe the U.S. the money, right? And we have leverage over you. So, I mean, those were kind of the things like that the Roosevelt corollary did. All right, now, eventually he handpicks Taft, the largest president to ever serve in the United States. Taft was a one-term president. And the reason he was a one-term president was that it was because eventually Theodore Roosevelt disliked what Taft was doing and ran against him. He formed the Bull Moose Party, right? So we kind of saw like a split in the Republican Party there for a while. It looks like the Republican Party's kind of sticking around Trump. But, there was talk there for a little while of Trump making his own party if not enough Republicans went along with him. And so that was the case here. Basically, and we'll get to this in a minute, but, Roosevelt doesn't like what Taft does so much that he chooses to run against him. Well, the other Republicans are like, no, Taft's our president. So Roosevelt was like, fine, if you're going to stick by Taft, I will form my own political party. And he forms the Bull Moose Party, right? They called it the Bull Moose Party because somebody tried to assassinate him. He got shot. He had a pocket watch right there where he got shot, and the bullet doesn't go through the pocket watch. And he stands there, he finishes his speech, and he says it takes more than a bullet to bring down a bull moose. All right. And then so they named the political party the Bull Moose Party. Kind of a crazy story. But President William H. Taft's foreign policy aimed to substitute dollars for bullets. He was like he still used the military, but he was trying to focus more on let's spend money and let's buy our way out of like some of these fights, but we're still using this money to invest in foreign governments and get our companies going in places like Latin America. So he encouraged American investment in business abroad. American businesses did invest in Latin America. Sometimes they fell back on military intervention when they had to, and Roosevelt doesn't like it. Now, the two of them get in a big fight. They have, you got the Bull Moose Party and the Republican Party. Republicans are split amongst the two parties. And as a result, in walks actually the most educated president we've ever had, Woodrow Wilson. He was a lawyer. He was a college professor. He had a doctorate. He had a doctorate in political science, I believe. And he was going to set about to create the perfect government, which, in my opinion, he did a pretty good job. All right, so here he is kind of in a way like, we're going to help the poor brown man out again. This got like kind of overtones of social Darwinism. He's showing Venezuela and Nicaragua and Mexico what is the best way to live, right? So what does that say? We can have no sympathy with those who seek to seize the power of government to advance their own personal interests or ambitions. So it's almost like he's teaching these poor little Latin American countries, like, you shouldn't have dictators. You should have republics like ours. All right. The irony of that is we install a lot of those dictators. Moral diplomacy is what Woodrow Wilson called it. So President Woodrow Wilson's foreign policy sought to promote human rights and national self-determination. It didn't promote conquest. But, excuse me, guys. And a little window pop up there. And again, let's cancel that. Get out of there. Go away. All right. So it didn't promote conquest, but used military intervention to influence government and business. So moral diplomacy means that the U.S. government should favor honorable diplomacy, but may still resort to military intervention. So what was one result of moral diplomacy? American imperialism and conquest decreased. So I think maybe this is where we get into this a little bit of a high ground, which is, I mean, it's not a bad place to be. Although you know, as Americans, taking the high ground can seem condescending to other people. Trust me, as a guy who traveled abroad when he was younger, the moral high ground is where you say, well, you know, our country is better because ... and ... And make no mistake about it, America is one of the best countries in the world to live. You got a lot of personal freedoms. There's probably more opportunity here than in most places. But when you sit there with your stick on the chalkboard and you're telling other countries how to live, it's real easy for them to say, wait a minute, you're telling me this, but what did you do with Chiquita Banana Company in Guatemala? You're telling me this, but how did you treat the African Americans? How did you treat the Native Americans? And so it's real easy. That's a really precarious place to be, right? All right, so under the Wilson administration, by the way, it's Pancho Villa. It's kind of a fun guy to study because Pancho Villa is, he's like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, one of the first cartels, right? He's a bandit living in northern Mexico. The Mexican government's chasing him around. They don't really like him. There's different civil wars, kind of like different bandit groups around. And Pancho Villa decides he's going to attack the United States. He marches up into New Mexico and maybe Texas, and he ends up attacking a couple of American towns and killing several Americans. What was his motivation? I'm not really sure. We'd have to look that up. Wilson decides to send troops into Mexico. So who ran Mexico for decades as a dictator? This was, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but it's Porfirio Diaz, right? So he's the dictator over Mexico, and it gets to the point where a lot of people in Mexico they're getting to the point where they want to get rid of him. The dilemma for us is he looks like stability from a business standpoint, right? We got businesses in Mexico. Mexico was in a state of civil war. Enter Pancho Villa, who was a Mexican rebel fighter whom President Wilson initially tried to win over. Eventually, Villa raided a town in the United States, and Wilson sent U.S. troops to Mexico to try and capture him. So without Mexican permission, we send a modern military into Mexico trying to hunt this guy down. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen anymore. Usually, like, we work well enough with Mexico, and at least right now seem to have a good enough relationship with Mexico that if there's somebody like Pancho Villa, let's say, El Chapo, that's the guy I'm thinking of. Modern day Pancho Villa, right? If there's really an issue, the Mexican government will go after the guy and then just hand him over to us, right? So we try to let Mexico handle their own internal affairs. All right, so that was it. That was the end of the slideshow. A lot to say about that. The key to take away from this is that really we treated Latin America like our own playground. And that's part of the age of imperialism. Now, here's the thing. This is going to lead us into World War I because what's happening here, England, France, Germany, Japan, Russia, United States, all competing for colonies. And, you know, places like Italy and Germany are calling foul play on some of this colony grab. right? And that's leading them into conflict with countries like England and France. And so, what's up for the next chapter? Well, what's up for the next chapter is all this imperialism going to lead to World War I. We're going to learn about it. We're going to take a field trip on Thursday. I hope you guys enjoy that. All right. As for now, I hope this will work for you for our final segment on the progressive era. And I will go ahead and put this on Edpuzzle. We won't take a quiz with this. We'll just do it, questions on Edpuzzle. Maybe even make it short questions, right? All right. Good luck, guys. Have fun. We'll see you on Thursday.